Hello everyone, this is Tom Uren and I'm here with the Grugq for the first BTN of the year. G'day Grugq, how are you?
G'day Tom. Fine yourself. Happy New Year, by the way.
Thanks. I'm well. This week's edition is brought to you by Prowler, the open source cloud security management company. Find them at prowler.com. So Grugq, over the Christmas New Year's break, probably the biggest news was that the US, I guess they basically kidnapped Nicolas Maduro, who is the either president or the leader of Venezuela. There was a pretty complex military operation to snatch him from, I believe it was a military base in Caracas, which is the capital of Venezuela. Now, the interesting thing from our point of view is that there
was computers involved.
Exactly. So
all those 150 airplanes, they had computers in them. Let's talk about the critical factor then.
So the thing that caught my eye, the news I saw was this headline: Trump suggests US use cyber attacks to turn off lights in Venezuela during strikes. So that's the headline in Politico. And the New York Times says that the operation began with a cyber operation that cut power to large swaths of Caracas, shrouding the city in darkness to allow the planes, drones and helicopters to approach undetected. So I love the drama that they've sort of managed to generate there.
So I wonder if it was cyber or just a regular blackout.
Well, maybe. So
could you tell? And
so there's a tweet from or Blue Sky post, whatever, from Oleg Shakarov, who is a cyber person who often comments on Russian issues. But he links to a Venezuelan report that shows the Venezuelan power company saying, yes, US attacks did disrupt power. And then they've got a photo of a shot-out substation where you can see all these holes. So
it's cyber being very connected is, I think, what we're...
So that doesn't, to me, eliminate the possibility that cyber was also involved.
Yeah.
Who knows where the photo comes from. I don't know, maybe you would want to make it look like they were shot out. But it also seems entirely plausible that there was a combination.
Why would there not be both?
Yes.
Maybe...
Yep. Like the New York Times sentence seemed to me to be a bit thin in that it's not the street lights that stop cities from being attacked.
Well, like helicopters and warplanes are not like thugs on the corner who can get scared away because it's a little bit bright outside, but who come out in droves now that the lights are off.
Yeah. Now there's also the possibility that power outage disrupted like real air defense systems. And who knows, maybe that's possible. I wouldn't rule that out.
It would. There's probably sort of last line stuff, which is, a guy with a machine gun on a rooftop. And if the lights go out and he can't see what he's shooting at, then...
Makes life difficult.
And that's obviously useful when you have choppers going low and slow, because they are vulnerable to a guy with the machine gun. Whereas,
some report I read somewhere, one of the choppers was hit or was fired at or something like that. So
there was some slight damage to one chopper, but it was able to complete the mission without falling out of the sky, which is,
Yep. Now I'll just read what Trump said about it. It was dark. The lights of Caracas were largely turned off due to a certain expertise that we have. It was dark and it was deadly, Trump said during a press conference about the operation. So that people have seized on that and said cyber was likely.
Proof positive. Yeah.
I guess there are other possibilities. Like you could have insiders that you just pay to switch off lights. We seem to be at this point poo-pooing the idea, but I actually think that it probably did happen, right?
Yes. I think that the evidence for it is thin, but the fact of it is probably very solid.
Right.
I can imagine a world in which it didn't happen, but that seems less plausible in every particular than it did happen.
So, like the things I'm thinking of are they had a long lead time. Turning off power is absolutely something that cyber operations can do. Like, it's been demonstrated. Like, they've actually had maybe 2 terms worth of preparation in that Trump in his first term was trying different cyber operations. So I think there would have been a very long-term effort to say, what is the critical infrastructure in Venezuela? What could we do? What is in the realm of possibility?
Even if they didn't look into it particularly seriously, they would have had a folder somewhere of like, here's what we did last time. Here's everything we scanned. Here's everything we know. You know.
What's changed rather than starting from zero.
Right. And to be clear, even if they did start from zero in, if not January, then September or August, whenever they started shooting the speedboats, which, like, that would have been enough time.
You know? And it also seems like so they had the time, they almost certainly had the capability, because I don't expect Venezuela is a really robustly defended critical infrastructure. No. And if you had, once you've got those two, like, all you need is the intent, and it's like, well, why would you not turn the lights off if you could?
Right, and I think this is, there's a couple of things going in here. One of them is that turning the lights off is sort of the flagship U.S. idea of cyber war, right? It's what they lead with, right? Like, if they talk about, like, the cyber Pearl Harbor, they go to the power grid, right? They don't go to, like, public opinion before an election. Like, that's not you know, like, that's not the thing they worry about. It's very much the, like, what if someone goes after our critical infrastructure? So this is absolutely, this goes to how they think about cyber war, about how you use cyber. Also, very, very long ago, I was speaking to an American, and I was doing my usual, you know, like, why would you ever want to turn off the grid? That's dumb. And they said, well, you know, let's say you had a helicopter pilot or a pilot who had been shot down and was stranded inside an enemy city. You would turn the lights off so that the special forces could go in there and rescue them under cover of darkness. I was like, I mean, okay, fine. It's not a military war thing. It's like an enabler of an operation.
Right.
That makes sense.
Yeah. What strikes me about that is that's exactly what's happened here. Is they've turned off the lights. It's not a downed pilot, but they used the under cover of darkness, I guess, special forces to recover a particular individual. Now, like, there would have been a lot of intelligence support as well to have Maduro's pattern of life, where he was, what he does, when, where. I'm sure SIGINT and cyber espionage played a role, and human sources as well. So all of that would have been in the lead up. And then you've got the capability and the, well, it may not be like absolutely critical to turn off the lights. Like, probably, I imagine they could have done it other ways.
Look, I'm pretty sure that if I was a chopper pilot and I was going into a place that I knew had Russian air defense systems in place, and someone said, don't worry about it, you know, the NSA is going to use their computers and, like, beep boop, and you'll be safe.
Cyber command.
I would not be super on board with that. But if they said, NSA, Cyber Command, they're going to go and they're going to beep boop, and we'll also have our growlers out doing their anti-radar stuff, I'd be like, okay, fine. You know, but, like, I can live with that.
Yeah, so
and I believe that's what happened. You know, it's
like, it seems like it's an operation that's important enough that you would throw all the capabilities you had.
Yes.
You know, your standard warfare, electronic warfare, countermeasures.
Why hold back? There's not going to be another raid to steal Maduro.
That's right.
Like, it's you don't need to save it for the next time instead.
Well, I mean, the only reason you would save it is if you thought you were going to give away something that you wanted to save for something else. But I can't imagine what that would be.
Right. And
Greenland, I guess.
I don't think. Well, I was going to say, like, so the thing is, I think that the capability is going to be so bespoke and tailored for that infrastructure, you know, the systems that they are using, whatever. Even if the implants and the tools leak, it's not going to be particularly useful because they won't be using that specific set of tooling again. That was
Right.
it would have been developed for this operation.
Yeah. So one of the things I was going to say is that they probably have other options to turn out the lights, and one of them would be just to blow a lot of stuff up. In this case, I'm not sure that I would really describe it as a theory of victory, but their plan, at least, is to install someone else who will maybe not install them, but let someone else run the country who is...
They don't want to destroy infrastructure they have to rebuild.
Yeah, that's right. It's like
and
the business as usual theory. So
yeah.
a cyber attack actually makes a lot of sense as a temporary disruption.
I'm quite down on cyber as a pure military capability, as a substitute for a kinetic option. It has a lot of things that make it sort of not good for that, right? Like it has these long lead times. It's temporary. The effect is sort of hard to predict. Like it might last for days or it might last for hours. Who really knows? It might not work completely. It might only work for part of the target. These are not things that you want in a military capability because you want something that's predictable and can be tasked and all this stuff. But all of those things are actually benefits or don't apply in this case, right? Like the long lead time, you've got 8 years. It's plenty of time. It's temporary. You need an hour and a half, right? Like it's perfect.
Yep.
It's actually a benefit. It's temporary. Like
So it's more a special forces or special operations type.
Yes. Yeah. It's an enabler for an operation, which is fine for like the beginning of a war where there's no friction to upset things. After the first few weeks, it's the friction is built up and it's not possible to exploit the sort of thing. But in this case, where you just have an operation in isolation during peacetime, exploitation is easy. So it's an ideal fit. This is literally the only time that turning off the grid makes sense.
Right. Yep.
I've said it.
Yep.
I'll admit.
So a long time ago, we spoke about the invasion of Iraq. I think it was Iraq. And one of the things that the US used were these special bombs that were meant to disrupt electricity by spooling out a whole lot of carbon fiber or something. Yeah. And they were meant to have the same type of effect, a short-term disruption. But ironically, it turns out that they didn't work that well because sometimes they started fires. And I guess the idea was that they would short a system and trip a circuit breaker.
Right.
And
what they found was that people had used like pennies.
And so sometimes the substation would actually catch fire and be destroyed. And so sort of as a comparison, let's assume that cyber was used to switch off the lights. It seems to have been more effective in that there weren't a whole lot of destruction of electrical
civilian
infrastructure permanently. So I guess the summary of all that discussion is that, yes, we actually 100% believe that this is a useful application. I'm not convinced like we're on the dial from nice to have to absolutely necessary or decisive. Right.
Yeah. It's like if you're making a raid Maduro meal, like is cyber sort of like lamb shank in the middle, or is cyber like the little sprig of parsnip that you put on top, like a little cyber garnish?
I'm going to say maybe slightly more than a garnish. Maybe one of the...
It might be a mint sauce of cyber.
That's right. Yeah.
It sort of adds flavor, but you could live without it if you had to.
That's right. But without the special forces, people in the helicopters, there's no meal.
There's no meal.
Yeah.
I'd say one of the other reasons that I think cyber would be involved is that if you are a military command like Cybercom, and there's a big military operation being conducted for the commander-in-chief, you want to make sure that you have your hat in the ring, visibly, that you are taking part, that you're showing willing, like even if it's not massively critical, even if you aren't a huge part of it, you want to make sure that you're there and that he knows that you're there. because that's how you get funding next year.
Right. Yeah.
Like it's.
Yeah, certainly
I think that
the Trump administration seems keen on offensive cyber. Like several of the administration have talked about it, using it more. I think it's super interesting that Trump seemed to have hinted at it. And part of the reason I think it was more a garnish or a sauce than really decisive is that the lights of Caracas were largely turned off due to a certain expertise that we have. So Trump's talking about the skills and how special it is that they could even do it. And I think if it was decisive, he would say it was decisive, and that no other country could do this, and it really turned the tables or whatever.
Yeah, so I think that probably speaks to how close the head of Cybercom is to his ear, in making him aware that it happened, but even they aren't going to be foolish enough to say, like, it wouldn't be possible without...
if the lights had been on.
If you'd had to turn the lights out with tomahawks instead of with cyber, it just never would have worked.
That's right. So one of the other headlines that I thought was really interesting, again from Politico, Venezuela strike marks a turning point for US cyber warfare. Okay. Now, I actually think that that's right, but not perhaps because of the reasons you would first think. Yeah. So the headline sort of implies that it was decisive or it was a really key part.
Yeah, and Cybercom has now arrived, and they're finally their own standalone Air Force type unit that has a full 1/5 of all operational capability. Like they're I don't think that's.
But I
don't think that's new to the degree that it's happened, and I don't think it's changed from where they have been before, I guess. Like it might be
right, but I think it is a turning point in terms of from every operation of this sort. From now on, someone will say something about cyber, and it'll just be part of the operation. Like it's and sometimes it'll be the garnish. Maybe, I don't know how often, maybe exceptionally, sometimes it'll
maybe
be...
even the side dish at some point.
I was going to say, sometimes it may be the main thing occasionally, which would be an exciting day for us. But I think that from now on, it'll be acknowledged as a part of any complex operation. There'll be a cyber role, and it's not so much that it's there at all that'll be significant. It'll be like, to what extent.
Right.
And I think that's the turning
point. As an
point.
enabler or a shaper of the environment, how big a role did it play?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely. It does seem like maybe the turning point is more about the integration with regular forces, having now sort of gone through the process and learned how to do it. That might be more of what's going on than I don't think the skills have changed, and it hasn't sort of stepped up there. I think it's just more understood by other branches who are able to then see how it fits into the planning process and integrate it at that point, as opposed to
it feels like it's got
an afterthought,
a seat at the planning table, maybe.
Right, yeah. Not at the kids' table anymore. Now it's.
I thought this might
maybe we shouldn't record these things during lunchtime so that we stop using food metaphors all the time.
Well, it may be lunchtime for you, but it's getting... We both agree that it's a sort of a bit of a turning point in a kind of political sense, in the way that the US at least will talk about it, that it's part of the planning process. But do you think that this will change maybe public is the wrong word, but the cyber cognoscenti, their view of cyber operations in warfare? Right.
Yeah, so I've definitely noticed a sort of a change in the overall
vibe?
Feelings. The vibe. Yeah. So look, I've certainly sensed a change in the vibe. So after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there was the sense that cyber didn't work because the airborne forces failed to capture Hostomel and the tanks failed to capture Kyiv.
Yep.
Which, I mean, like, it doesn't really make any sense if you think about it. Like, cyber had nothing to do with either of those things, and they had nothing to do with cyber. But there's this real sense of like, oh my God, cyber doesn't work. This is terrible. We've all invested all this time. Our careers are tied up in this. and it's completely useless. What are we going to do? This is terrible. And then there sort of came this multi-year effort of trying to explain the failure of Russian cyber without indicting cyber as a system overall. So there's a lot of, cyber would have worked if they just did more of it. Or cyber doesn't work because the Russians do it wrong, unlike us. Or any sort of, like no true Scotsman approach. And it seems like things have sort of normalized to a bit of like, okay, well, maybe we're not the biggest dog in the shed, but cyber is still useful. But I don't think that was in their hearts, right? I think that's sort of like a brave front that everyone was putting on, whereas they still have this niggling doubt of like, what if when push comes to shove and it turns out that, we can't actually do anything useful? That seems to be gone. There seems to be like this exuberance now from the cyber side of things.
I don't think I pay
very much this like.
Yeah, I don't think I pay as much attention as you do to online discourse, but I get the same vibe that people are like, see, cyber can be useful.
Yeah, we're back, baby.
And
like it's
and I saw somewhere someone saying that and I think I called them set pieces, where you've got time and space to plan and have a complex operation. Like that's where its role is. Yeah, and so it seems to sort of oscillate around.
Yeah. Well, I think that the ultimate problem is that cyber is very good, but it's not necessarily very good at emulating a kinetic capability.
Right.
Like it's very good at things that are not necessarily a great match for military stuff, but everyone's very invested in how can it be used as a military capability. And so when its weaknesses are shown up, then like everyone gets really upset and depressed. And then when its strengths are highlighted, everyone gets really, really happy again. And the truth is, it's still like it's not a great military capability. It's good, but it's not great. Like it's
it's
great at other things, but not this, right?
Right. I'm just thinking of the Gartner hype cycle, and it seems like we've passed through the peak of inflated expectations and the trough of disillusionment. we're gradually getting to the right place. Cyber is a minor source.
Yeah, it's so I think that's actually a fair place for cyber, is that there needs to be some level of moderation on, like there's the cyber boosters who really put out this idea of like it's the big red button, you slap it and like civilization ends. And I think that those people were the ones who were particularly disappointed when Russia invaded Ukraine and that didn't happen. And I think maybe they've gotten some wind in their sails again. But if there's a SWAT raid into a house and someone turns the lights off and then the SWAT raid succeeds and they say, that's because we turned the lights off as the critical part, right? I feel very much like that's where cyber is. It's like it helped. It was good.
Yep.
But, it probably wasn't the decisive factor. It's probably the SWAT team that gets a little bit more credit than the light flicker.
Right, yeah. Well, I don't know. Like, my knowledge of SWAT raids is mostly from Hollywood movies. But it seems like when you've got those situations, they do just cut the power as a matter of course. Like, it's your default
standard
playbook.
Yeah.
In the same way, I imagine that any complex military, I guess I'll call them a special operation, in that which implies that you've got
a special military operation.
Yeah, you've got the time and space to plan something complex.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not flicking the lights, but it would be what can cyber operations contribute, and it'll be different depending upon the particular situation. Maybe you can do this. Maybe you can do that.
Here's the thing: is I'm sure I've mentioned this before, but there's this book called Spec Ops, and link in the description below. And I've always said that his description of how special operations succeed, like the factors of success, are the exact same ones of why hacking succeeds. The things that you do have been practiced so that you do them by rote. You're not sort of guessing as you're going along. That there's security in that you don't alert the target beforehand.
Yep.
That you have secrecy, that you have purpose. Like you're going in, you do your thing. Like you're not showing up and wandering around being like, okay, so what should we do next? It's very much, mission and goal oriented. So he's got like all of these things that go into successful special operations, and cyber fits very well with those because those are the things that make cyber operations succeed.
Right. Yep.
And so I think the fact that cyber marries very well with special operations in the real world is exactly what you'd expect, because they're such close matches overall in terms of the deciding factors that make them a success, and sort of the way that they are prepared and operated. Like there's a lot of reconnaissance, there's a lot of planning, and then when it actually happens, it's very quick. But before that, there's all this prep that goes into it. And yeah, so my strong sense is that it does make sense for these things, but in a way only for these things.
Right.
Like it's not a good match for a general military sort of, a Battle of the Somme is not the sort of thing that cyber works well with. When it's multiple months of just hard slog, that's not a good cyber environment. Whereas this sort of 2-hour operation, perfect. Cyber.
Yeah. So the Delta, I think it was Delta Force part, the story is that they constructed a model, a one-to-one model or a replica of the facility that they were storming. And so you can bet that there was also a cyber range for whatever the plan was that they would have practiced on. And
building a model and practicing on it is like that standard special operations practice. A simple plan, carefully concealed, repeatedly and realistically rehearsed, and executed with surprise, speed, and purpose. Those are the decisive factors in special operations success. And I believe that those are the same things for a hacking operation, that it's the sort of, it's straightforward, it's concealed, it's rehearsed, it's sort of verified to work, you know what it's going to do. It occurs, like you do it with surprise, so they're not expecting it, you do it rapidly.
Yep.
And you know what you're doing. You've got a sort of, you're mission focused. And I think that those things that make hacking successful and that make special operations successful mean that they are a good match.
Right.
And so I'm not at all surprised that it would be a useful capability to add to a special operation. I think that they're very much meant for each other, that they fill the same sort of roles.
Right. So I guess from the Gartner hype cycle point of view, we've passed the trough of disillusionment and the peak of inflated expectations. We're now on the slope of enlightenment.
Which is, surprisingly enough, we achieve by turning the lights out.
Thanks a lot, Grugq.
Thanks a lot, Tom.